When I met Daniel, he was standing under an awning in the rain, scrolling through his phone like the whole world was boring him. He looked up at me with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes, and I told myself not to fall in love with that. But of course I did. We started dating the next week. He was magnetic in that way only people who hold something back can be. I liked trying to find out what he was hiding. I liked being the one he chose to tell things to. It felt like a prize, being led into the small space of his approval. At first, he made me feel like every emotion I had was brilliant. If I cried during a movie, he'd pull me closer. If I texted him paragraphs about how happy I was just to hear his voice, he'd write back, "I love how much you feel." I believed him. I thought we had that rare kind of intimacy, the kind that made you less alone in the world. But slowly, subtly, things started to change. He'd sigh when I called him just to tell him about my day. He'd look at his phone when I was talking about something that upset me. I told myself he was just stressed, tired, busy. I didn't want to admit what was really happening. The first time he told me I was too much, it was a Wednesday night, and we were eating takeout on his couch. I had just told him I was anxious about my job and worried my boss was icing me out. I wasn't crying, I wasn't yelling, I was just scared. I remember his hand still holding the fork halfway to his mouth. He looked at me like I'd dropped a bucket of ice water on him and said, "Can you not spiral over every little thing? You're just a lot, too much sometimes." He said it like he was tired, like I was work. I laughed. I don't know why I did that. Maybe I thought if I laughed first, it wouldn't sting as bad. "Too much?" I repeated, trying to make it sound like a joke. He didn't laugh. "It's just exhausting," he said, eyes back on the TV. I went quiet. I felt my heart drop, like a stone in a lake. I should have left then, but instead I stayed. I stayed because I thought I could shrink. I started texting less, stopped saying everything I felt. I held back tears and smiles alike. I made myself smaller in every conversation, hoping it would be easier for him to carry me. But love doesn't grow in silence, and pretending not to feel doesn't make you feel less. It just makes you alone. Over the months, I noticed a pattern. He only liked the version of me that didn't need anything, the cool, low-maintenance girlfriend, the one who didn't ask too many questions, who didn't call when he went out, without telling me, who didn't need reassurance when he was distant. That wasn't me, not really. I've always been someone who feels deeply, loudly. I cry when I'm happy, I love with everything I have, and I ask for the things I need. I've been told my whole life that that kind of vulnerability is beautiful, but Daniel treated it like a burden. Then one night, after another small fight, where I asked him why he hadn't responded to my text for 2 days, he said, "You really need to chill. My mom said the other day you seem a little intense. Maybe tone it down when we have dinner with them next week." That moment split something in me. He'd let his mom think I was intense. He'd talked about me to her like I was a problem. And he wanted me to play along, smile politely, be sweet and agreeable. Less. So I made a different plan. He didn't know I kept all the messages. Every text I'd sent, every late-night apology, every paragraph where I explained myself, begged for clarity, offered love when I should have offered silence. I had a folder, like evidence, because something deep down had always told me I might need to remember I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't too much. I was just too much for him. The night of the dinner came. His parents were polite, conservative, very practiced in saying things without saying anything. His mom had a perfect blonde bob and a pearl necklace I imagined she wore in her sleep. His dad was quiet, nodding at everything, probably checking football scores in his head. We were seated at their big polished table with stiff napkins and heavy silverware that clinked too loudly whenever I moved. I was wearing a pale blue dress Daniel liked. He had once told me I looked less dramatic in soft colors. His mom made small talk. She asked about my job, the weather, my plans for the holidays. I smiled, responded sweetly, like I was auditioning for a part. I waited until dessert, cheesecake, Daniel's favorite. He leaned back in his chair like he owned the room, and that's when I said it. Actually, I began, careful to keep my voice light. I've been meaning to get an outside perspective on something. Do you mind if I ask you both for advice? His mother smiled, eager. Of course, dear. I pulled out my phone. Daniel's body shifted slightly. What are you doing? I ignored him and scrolled to the folder. I want to read you a few messages, I said. They're between me and this guy I've been seeing. I just want to know if you think I'm overreacting. Daniel's face drained of color. Okay, that's enough, he said under his breath. But his mom was already nodding. Go on, honey. Let's hear it. I read the first one. It was me asking, Hey, are you okay? Haven't heard from you in a couple days and I just want to make sure everything's all right. Then his reply, Can you not? I just need space. Stop being so needy. I read another. Me again. I feel hurt when you say things like that and then ignore me. I'm trying to understand what you need. His reply, This is what I mean. You always make things dramatic. I'm not your emotional crutch. Daniel was frozen, staring at the table. His father had put his fork down. His mother's face was tight, but she nodded slowly. Would you say that's too much? I asked, feigning innocence. I've been told that I'm too emotional, that I care too loudly. What do you think? His mother looked at her son, then at me. I think, she said, her voice measured and strange. Someone forgot what it means to be kind. There was a silence after she said it, not the kind of silence that fills a room awkwardly, but the heavy kind, the kind that makes your chest feel too tight, like someone's pressing a hand right in the center of it. Daniel looked like he was trying to decide whether to laugh or storm out. He ended up doing neither. He just stared at the table, his jaw flexing and unflexing, like every muscle in his face wanted to scream, but his pride wouldn't let him. His mom reached for her wine glass, took a slow sip, and set it down with both hands like she was weighing it. You know, I raised Daniel to be respectful, she said, her eyes still on me. But the words meant for him. To be responsible for how he makes people feel. I don't know what's going on here, but that didn't sound like the man I thought. I raised. I could feel Daniel's fury building in the stillness between us, like a kettle about to scream. This is ridiculous, he muttered. You're just trying to embarrass me. I turned to him calmly. I didn't make you send those messages. His father finally spoke. His voice was deep and quiet, like the ground under your feet right before it splits. Son, he said, if those were your words, own them. Don't blame her for reading them out loud. Daniel's eyes flashed with something sharp and panicked, like a child caught lying with the stolen cookie still in his hand. You're all making this into something it's not, he snapped. She's reading text without context. You don't know the whole story. Oh, I do, I said softly. I know it from every angle because I lived it. I breathed it every day. I sat alone on the couch waiting for your replies. I held my breath every time I tried to tell you how I felt because I didn't want to be too much. I rewrote my messages 3, 4, 5 times to make sure they didn't sound crazy. I apologized to you for things you did. So don't tell me I don't know the whole story. His mother cleared her throat. And what exactly would the context be, Daniel? She asked, voice crisp. Because all I'm hearing is a woman trying to communicate and a man shutting her down. He stood up then, his chair screeching back with a violent sound. This is insane, he said. Why are we doing this here? Why would you bring this into my parents' house? I stared up at him, unflinching. Because this is the only place where you can't control the narrative. I needed someone else to hear it, not to take sides, but to see it clearly. Because I stopped trusting myself around you." His mom looked at me with something like grief in her eyes. "Sweetheart," she said slowly, "why would you stay in a relationship where you felt the need to save evidence of your pain?" The words gutted me in the gentlest way. My throat felt tight. I swallowed, nodded, smiled weakly. Because I thought love was supposed to be hard. I thought if I tried harder, he'd love me better. I thought maybe I was too much, and if I could just be less, he'd finally see me. Daniel huffed. "This is some kind of performance," he said. "You're doing this for pity, for attention. You are too much. Always have been." And there it was, out loud, for his parents to hear, for the air to absorb and echo. I looked at his mom then, and her mouth parted just slightly, like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Her face changed, not with rage, but with recognition. She looked at her son like she didn't know him, like she was remembering something she hadn't wanted to see before. Then she stood up. "Daniel," she said, "I think you should leave the room." He blinked. "What?" "You heard me." Her voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "Go. Now." He scoffed, gave a short, humorless laugh, and walked out, muttering something under his breath I couldn't catch. The room felt oddly lighter once he was gone. Not free of weight. No, the air still held everything that had just happened. But lighter, like we'd finally acknowledged the elephant in the room instead of pretending it wasn't crushing us. His father looked at his wife. "Do you think he talks to his sister like that?" She didn't answer. She was still staring at the door Daniel had disappeared behind. Then, slowly, she sat back down. Her posture was different now, more real. She looked at me like a woman looks at another woman, not as a potential daughter-in-law, not as a girl dating her son, but as someone who had been there. "I stayed with his father for years before he got better," she said, the confession trembling at the edges. "I used to think I was the problem too, that if I could just be softer, quieter, thinner, happier, he'd love me the way I needed. It took a long time to realize that loving someone doesn't mean breaking yourself to fit their shape." I felt a tear slip out before I could stop it. Her words cracked something in me, something I'd been bracing against for months. "I'm so tired," I whispered. "I'm so tired of feeling like everything I say is wrong." She reached across the table and took my hand. It was the first truly kind thing anyone had done for me in a long time. "You're not too much," she said. "He's just not enough." We sat in that silence together, not awkward now, but whole. Her husband got up, went to the kitchen, and came back with more wine for both of us, like he knew we were about to sit there for a while. I didn't know what the next step was, if I'd leave him that night or the next day, but I knew something irreversible had happened. The truth had been named, spoken, and echoed. There was no going back to pretending. I didn't sleep at Daniel's that night. His mother offered the guest room without asking questions, just pressed a soft hand to my shoulder as I gathered my things, my purse, my phone, my dignity, and led me down the hallway like I was someone she wanted to protect. I sat on the edge of the bed in that unfamiliar room with the pale lavender sheets and the faint scent of fabric softener clinging to every corner. The light was off, but I didn't close my eyes. I just sat there in the dark, running every moment of the dinner over and over again in my mind like a movie reel that refused to stop spinning. Somewhere down the hall, I could hear voices through the walls. Not loud, not angry, just tense. His mother and Daniel. The rhythm of confrontation in low tones. She was calm. I could tell, even without the words. That scared him more than shouting ever could. I imagined him pacing, wounded ego bleeding all, over the carpet, trying to twist the narrative back in his favor, trying to say things like she ambushed me. You don't understand. It wasn't that bad, but the silence that followed told me everything. She wasn't buying it. Maybe she never really had. At some point, hours later, I lay down, not to sleep, but to rest from the ache in my ribs that only ever comes from holding your breath too long. The kind of ache that builds when you've made yourself small for too many months, trying to survive on crumbs of affection. I thought of all the times I'd rehearsed my feelings in voice notes I never sent, all the drafts of messages I deleted, because they were too long, too emotional, too raw. I'd been living in half measures, in the cracked space between honesty and fear. And now that the truth had been poured out on a dinner table under the weight of crystal wine glasses and a mother's steady gaze, I couldn't take any of it back. In the morning, the house was quiet. Sunlight poured into the kitchen like it had no idea what had happened the night before. His mom was already up, in a soft gray robe, sipping her coffee and flipping through a newspaper she didn't seem to be reading. She looked at me as I stepped in, her eyes soft but unreadable. I didn't mean for any of this, I said, because the guilt had woken up before I did. She shook her head. Don't apologize. You didn't do anything wrong. I nodded, but the guilt didn't care. It stayed. Did he stay? I asked. She hesitated. He left around midnight, said he needed air. He hasn't come back. Of course he hadn't. He needed space. He always needed space. Space to avoid. Space to escape. Space to not take responsibility for how he broke people without even noticing. She placed a mug of coffee in front of me. You know, she said after a moment, I watched myself in you last night. So many things I wanted to say back when I was younger and never did. Maybe if I had, I'd have saved myself years. I took a sip and stared at the steam swirling up into the quiet. Do you regret staying? Her answer came faster than I expected. Yes and no. I regret the years I spent trying to change someone who didn't want to change. But I don't regret waking up from it. There was something beautiful in that. The idea that waking up could be worth the nightmare. That even if you lost time, you didn't have to lose yourself forever. Later that day, I went back to Daniel's apartment. Not to talk, not to argue, just to gather what was mine. I had a key, but I knocked anyway. He opened the door with eyes, rimmed red and 1,000 unspoken sentences hovering in the air between us. I stepped past him without a word. He followed me through the rooms as I packed, my toothbrush, my books, the hoodie he never wore but I always stole. I moved efficiently, deliberately, like someone who'd rehearsed this moment in dreams. He didn't speak until I was halfway done. So that's it? He asked. His voice cracked just slightly. You're leaving over a dinner? I turned to face him. No, Daniel, I'm leaving over the 1,000 moments before that dinner. I'm leaving because I've spent months questioning whether my feelings were valid, because every time I reached out, you pulled away, because I gave you every piece of myself in the hope that you'd meet me halfway, and you just stood there, he scoffed. I told you I needed space. And I gave it to you, I said, my voice sharper now. God, I gave you oceans of space, but you didn't use it to love me better. You used it to disappear. He leaned against the wall, like the weight of the conversation was too much for him. I never asked for all that intensity. I just wanted something easier. And there it was. The truth again, uncloaked and ugly. Easier. He didn't want real. He wanted convenient. He didn't want someone with fire and feeling. Someone who would challenge him and show him parts of himself he didn't want to see. He wanted someone simple, silent, safe in her restraint. I zipped the last bag and lifted it off the bed. Then I hope you find easy, I said, but I won't be shrinking for anyone ever again. He didn't follow me to the door. He didn't try to stop me. I walked out into the cold afternoon with my bags in my hands and something strangely light in my chest. Not joy. No, not yet. But something like relief. Like someone had finally unknotted the rope around my lungs and let me breathe. I didn't cry on the way home. I expected to, but the tears didn't come. Instead, I played music loud, windows cracked, open, and let the wind pull away every last trace of him clinging to my skin. The texts were still on my phone, the digital thread of every time I begged to be heard. Every moment I poured love into a void that only ever echoed back silence. I scrolled through them once more, not out of pain, but to remember. To remind myself how easy it is to lose yourself, one apology at a time. A week passed, then another. I got a message from his mother. It wasn't long, just thinking of you. You deserved more. You still do. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Some things don't need a response to be understood. They just need to be felt. It's strange. The way life begins to soften around the edges when you finally let go of something that was quietly killing you. The first few days after I left, Daniel felt like coming off of something addictive. My fingers hovered over my phone, more times than I could count, halfway to texting him before I stopped myself. Not because I wanted to fix things anymore, but because the habit of explaining myself had been so deeply ingrained. I'd spent so long managing his moods, tiptoeing around his silences, anticipating his exits. My body still flinched when I heard my message tone, like it expected disappointment in place of affection. But every day, the space around me grew a little wider. The silence, once deafening, turned into a kind of music. I remembered the rhythm of my own thoughts. I started, sleeping through the night again. I picked up old habits I had let go of, writing poems in the margins of books, making dinner with loud music on, dancing barefoot in my apartment just because I felt like it. It wasn't that I was suddenly healed or whole. It was just that I wasn't being drained anymore. And sometimes peace isn't found in what you add to your life, but in what you finally remove. Daniel sent one message. Just one. It came exactly 9 days after I walked out of his apartment. It said, "You made your point. I hope you're happy." I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I didn't know what to say, but because, for once, I didn't feel the need to say anything at all. I didn't owe him closure. I didn't owe him forgiveness wrapped in a bow. His message wasn't about regret. It was about control, about getting the last word. And I'd finally stopped handing him the final say in my story. I deleted the why. Message, no reply, no explanation, no more. A month later, I ran into his mother at a small art gallery downtown. I was with my friend Clara, laughing about something, a coffee in one hand, my scarf sliding off my shoulder like it didn't want to be contained either. She spotted me from across the room, and I saw her eyes widen just slightly. Just enough to register surprise, but not regret. She walked over. There was something different about her posture. I'd seen her as composed before, sure. But that night at dinner, there had been a tension in her spine. A woman holding back her whole history for the sake of a polished evening. Now, her shoulders were relaxed, her smile unforced. "You look different," she said softly. I smiled. "I feel different." We stood in front of a canvas of red and gold, the kind of painting that doesn't look like anything and yet somehow says everything. "He still doesn't understand what happened," she said after a moment. "That doesn't surprise me." "I've tried," she added. "But I think you were right. He needs everything to be quiet. Still, manageable." "Not real," I said. She nodded slowly. "Yes, that." I turned to her, the question unspoken between us. "You were never too much," she said. I felt it like a pulse beneath my skin. Not just the words, but the weight of them. The way she said them like she had waited years to say them to someone. Maybe even to herself. I could see in her face the echoes of things she wished she'd done sooner. I didn't ask for her regrets. I didn't need to. I thanked her. Not just for the words, but for seeing me when I was trying so hard not to vanish. That night, I sat by my window as the sky turned purple and gold and let myself cry. Not because I missed Daniel. I didn't. Not anymore. But because I had survived. Something I hadn't had the words for when I was in it. And now that I was out, I needed to grieve the version of myself that thought love meant enduring pain quietly. I began writing again. Pages and pages of thoughts, memories, pieces of myself. I'd buried to keep someone else comfortable. I wrote about the girl who sat on his couch, trying not to cry. I wrote about the voice inside her that kept whispering, "This isn't love." I wrote about the silence between text messages and the way she'd reread his one-line replies like they were proof of something tender. I wrote until it stopped hurting. And then I kept writing because it felt like coming home. People talk a lot about red flags, but what no one tells you is how easy they are to ignore when you're trying to make someone love you. How you start labeling disrespect as just his way. How you shrink inch by inch until you're only shadows of your full self, too polite to be angry, too afraid to be loud. But walking away is a rebellion, a quiet revolution. And sometimes, the loudest thing you can do is leave without explaining yourself. A few weeks after the gallery, I received a letter. A real letter, folded neatly into a cream-colored envelope with no return address, but I knew the handwriting. It was his mother's. Inside, a single page. Dear you, I hope you keep speaking your truth, even when the room goes quiet. I hope you stay loud, stay emotional, stay real. The world needs women who take up space. You were never the problem. Thank you for reminding me I'm allowed to be more too. M.I. placed the letter in a small wooden box with other fragments of myself I was reclaiming. It didn't erase the pain of what had happened, but it anchored me in the knowledge that I wasn't alone. That sometimes healing begins with being heard, even if the voice that finally listens isn't the one you were trying to reach. I still think about that dinner sometimes. The way the room stilled when I read my own hurt out loud. The silence that followed, not of shame, but of understanding. I think about the fork in his father's hand, the way it hovered midair like a symbol of all the years he might have watched quietly. I think about his mother's voice, low, firm, and steady, and how it cut through years of unspoken things in a single sentence. But mostly, I think about myself, the version of me who stayed, the version of me who left, the version of me now, writing this not for revenge or validation, but for liberation, because he told me I was too much, and I finally understand that he was never enough.